Operation London Bridge. That's the code name given to the plan in place for the days and weeks after Queen Elizabeth II's passing. The Queen has been sitting on the royal throne since 1952. That's the longest reign of any monarch in British history. And during that time, she's seen over a dozen UK Prime Ministers, nearly 20 Summer Olympics, and over half a dozen popes. The Queen is the cornerstone to the Commonwealth, the patron to almost 600 organisations and charities, and plays a pivotal role in the UK's alliance with many countries. So her passing will bring about a lot of change. Not just for the United Kingdom, but potentially the world. Her private secretary, the Right Honourable Edward Young, will immediately pass a message on to the acting Prime Minister at the time. That message will likely read, "London Bridge is down." The Prime Minister will then set Operation London Bridge into action. Within minutes, the 15 governments outside of the UK where the Queen is head of state will be informed over a secure line. And that will be followed by the other 36 Commonwealth nations and leaders around the world. The gates of Buckingham Palace will then dawn a black-edged notice of the news. At the same time, a newsflash will alert media around the world. Every media outlet is prepared for the news. Every radio station has a network of lights that will flash to indicate a national catastrophe such as this. All BBC shows will stop and proceed to run a feed dedicated to the news. Newsreaders will change into the black suits and clothing that is on hand at all times in the news studio, and the traditional red BBC News branding will turn black. Newspapers, TV channels and radio stations have days of coverage ready to go. On the same day as her death, the Queen's eldest son, Charles, will immediately become king, and it's reported that the stock exchange, businesses and shops across the UK will likely close for the day out of respect. The day after the Queen's death, on a live stream, Charles will make his first official speech as king, and the government will swear its allegiance to the sound of a 41-gun salute in Hyde Park, London. After that, King Charles, if this is the name he so chooses, will set off on a UK tour, visiting the leaders of government in the capitals of each country, Edinburgh, Belfast and Cardiff, before returning to London. During this period, TV channels will play the many documentaries already made in the Queen's honour, and the BBC will refrain from playing comedy shows as a sign of respect until after the funeral. 4 days after her death, the Queen's coffin will be led on a military procession from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Hall. Here she will lie in state over the next 4 days, and after which King Charles, family and dignitaries will pay their respects. Then the doors will open to likely hundreds of thousands of people queued up outside. The funeral is estimated to take place 10 to 12 days after the Queen's passing. But one thing is certain: the day of the funeral will be an official bank holiday for the whole of the United Kingdom. The stock exchange will close for a second time in under 2 weeks, and many businesses will follow suit. At 11 AM sharp, the bells of Big Ben will chime, the country will fall silent, and the coffin will be brought inside Westminster Abbey, where 2,000 specially invited guests will bow their heads in prayer. After the service, the coffin will be taken to Windsor Castle, and then finally to St George's Chapel, where Queen Elizabeth II will likely be laid to rest next to her father, King George VI. Likely within a year after the funeral, an official coronation for King Charles will take place on yet another bank holiday. All in all, accounting for the multiple bank holidays, funeral expenses and coronation celebrations, the Queen's passing is estimated to cost the UK economy billions of pounds. In addition, hundreds of changes will happen across the UK in the months to come. New British currency will be printed with the King's portrait, and the Queen's currency will slowly be removed from use. The same will happen for stamps, passports, and police and military uniforms, and the national anthem will be changed to God Save the King. Not to mention how the world and Commonwealth will react to the new king could alter the British royal family forever. For example, there is growing support in Australia for the country to become a republic, and the Queen's death could heighten that support. This could lead other countries to follow suit, which would almost certainly weaken the British monarchy. This scenario will one day be upon us. Operation London Bridge will be triggered, and arguably the biggest funeral of our lifetime will be witnessed around the world. This will be the end of an era.
The Queen is at peace. She is surrounded by Prince Charles, King Charles, now Princess Anne, Prince Edward, Prince Andrew, also Prince William is here, and we are told that Prince Harry is on his way now from Aberdeen Airport to here in Balmoral. There were well-wishers here, but once the announcement came, the police slowly, very politely asked them to leave. The roads are closing to anything other than traffic relating to the royals, and it is just very quiet, incredibly quiet. It is the saddest of evenings here because this was a place that she truly loved. The people here loved her. She loved being here. The statement said she died peacefully. This was a place she was often living peacefully. She loved the peace of this place. She loved the countryside here. She loved the fresh air, and she loved the one commitment that she had here, which was the Braemar Highland Games, and she enjoyed the culture of the place, and she just loved being here. So it is an enormous sadness this evening to people here, but of course to people right across this country. And I think I mentioned that King Charles and the princes and princesses are here, but it's worth remembering that they are also sons and daughters and grandchildren, and this is an evening when, you know, our thoughts, the country's thoughts, will obviously be with them. And but in so many ways, the Queen, of course, was also a mother and grandmother to the whole nation. So this is just the saddest evening. With me is our Scotland correspondent, James Matthews, who spent, well, you've been up here quite often, haven't you, when the Queen has been in residence. It is a place that she loves.
She does. And it's a place where she would have been comfortable spending her final days. And I think we can draw comfort from what we know of her final days. I've spoken to people who saw her in recent weeks, and she was very much a woman of the land out here, getting out, enjoying the rolling countryside around her. She was seen walking her corgis, picnicking with her lady-in-waiting in her mother's fishing hut on the banks of the River Dee, having lunch in Glenmick, where she has a cottage, which had been refurbished in a way that was appropriate to her reduced mobility in her final days. She liked this place. Her family liked this place. They enjoyed being together as a family in good times and in bad. You know, we stand here in a place where 25 years ago, the family were located when Princess Diana died. We saw the pictures of Prince William driving his uncle, Prince Andrew, Sophie and Edward into Balmoral about an hour and a half ago. That face of grief on Prince William's face was similar to the look of grief I saw on the child Prince William when his mother died. When we watched Prince William and Harry walk this road, looking at floral tributes to their mother, tonight they will be reunited again. Harry has landed at Aberdeen Airport. We expect him to arrive here within some 15, 20 minutes. it's a time for the family to come together. They have lost a mother and a grandmother. They will come together in grief, in comfort, and in warmth, in a place where they know comfort and warmth and family.
They will be together tonight, and as you say, Harry is expected to arrive any moment now. But let's just talk about the coming hours and the coming days. We know, because of the statement, that King Charles, the Queen Consort, will be on their way back to London pretty shortly. They'll be back, we're told, tomorrow. But what about the body of Her Majesty the Queen?
There will be a period of national mourning. I mean, there has been a plan in place for some considerable time, possibly to be fine-tuned now that we are where we are. But the King and his Queen Consort, as you say, will travel back to London tomorrow. They will visit all, or the King will visit all 4 home nations. There will be that period of national mourning up until the funeral. In terms of the Queen's body, it will remain here for now, but that will be moved to St Giles Cathedral, just off the Royal Mile in Edinburgh, and thereafter to Buckingham Palace.
Yeah. Okay, James, thank you very much indeed. And indeed, the body will be taken first to Holyrood House, I think, and then along the Royal Mile to St Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh. And then the plan is for the Queen's body to be transported by train. The royal train will take the Queen from Waverley Station down to London. But as I say, at the moment, the family, most of the family have gathered. Prince Harry is on his way, Dermot, and here at Balmoral, just a sense of overwhelming sadness.
Mark, indeed, and that is reflected here at Buckingham Palace. There is no doubt that this is a major moment in the history of our United Kingdom, indeed in the history of the world. Such a long-serving and influential monarch passing after 70 years on the throne. I just wonder if we can take in some of the scenes here of the crowds gathering at Buckingham Palace, because they are flooding in here to absorb the enormity of what has just happened here today. Thousands of people now. When I first arrived here during the course of the afternoon, there was that brief statement from Buckingham Palace about the deterioration in the Queen's health, and that her doctors were concerned about her, but she was remaining at Balmoral as those members of the royal family gathered to be at her side. Well, then the sad news came at about 6:30 this evening, and since then the crowds are flooding in, as you can see there, quietly absorbing the situation, quietly, I imagine, paying their respects as well, and taking in the symbolism of what that flag flying at half-mast tells us, right slap bang in the centre of the roof of Buckingham Palace, fluttering in the light breeze of a rather gloomy September day, reflecting the mood of so many people here. And behind me in Green Park, which abuts Buckingham Palace, hundreds of people making their way down to take in the scenes, to say that they came to Buckingham Palace to see for themselves, to read for themselves the short formal statement which is posted on the gates of royal palaces on the major occasions, and there's none more major than this. The simple statement saying, as Her Majesty would have wished, I'm sure, that the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon, posted up there on the gates. And the King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. And Rhiannon Mills, our royal correspondent, joins me. And Rhiannon, I'm sure you're taking in these scenes as well. It is quite something just seeing the people silently, respectfully, just wanting to somehow be part of this, to say that they were present at the passing of a monarch, a much loved monarch, the longest reigning monarch, well, not just in our history, but in just about every country in the world's history. I know there are a few that served a little bit longer. Quite extraordinary scenes, Rhiannon.
Yeah, and I think it's important to stress that her age, 96 years old, a remarkable age to live until, but it shouldn't detract from the enormity of this moment. Most of us can't remember a time when she wasn't queen, and she was a woman who was recognised not just in this country, but right around the world, and held in such high esteem and respect by members of the public, politicians, religious leaders. Everywhere she went, crowds would come out to see her. And what is wonderful is when you look back at footage from those early days of her reign, where literally hundreds of thousands of people would come out onto the streets to see this glamorous young queen and her handsome prince, Prince Philip, alongside her. And yes, her look and her demeanour and the world changed during her 7 decades as queen. And yet, largely, it was deemed that she never put a foot wrong. And I think also when you consider public figures that we see today, it's often about their brand, it's about them, it's about their personality. And yet, one person once said that the Queen, she had the conviction to be boring. She wanted to keep herself private at times. It wasn't about her, it was about her role. I think we will see a couple of things play out over the next couple of days. Of course, huge constitutional change. Some may describe it as a constitutional earthquake as we feel the reverberations of what has happened. We now automatically have a new king. And it's literally been confirmed in the last few moments that the new king will be known as King Charles III. Now, at home, you might be thinking, well, of course he would be. But actually, when it comes to a change in reign, the new sovereign is able to choose a different name. And of course, we've seen that throughout history. So instead of being King Charles, he could have chosen any of his other names, which are Philip, Arthur, or George. However, we now know that he will be King Charles III. He also takes on other titles, so Head of the Commonwealth, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, Supreme Governor of the Church of England. So we have the constitutional change, we have the change in head of state, but I think what we're also going to see, and I think you're already probably seeing there at Buckingham Palace, you will have a greater sense of this, is a sense that people want to come together, a collective sense of shock and mourning. It was, after all, only 2 days ago that we saw her still carrying out her constitutional duties. And as Liz Truss said in her speech, there are going to be difficult days ahead where communities will come together, just as we have done right throughout her reign to mark those milestone moments, to pay our respects to what was a life devoted to service.
Indeed, Rhiannon, thank you for that. And I would echo those thoughts in terms of what people here are coming to witness and to experience. There's a huge sense, obviously and clearly, of the end of an era, but also a little bit of trepidation about what lies ahead. We know that we are in very difficult times, both nationally and internationally, and at this very moment, the rock, as Liz Truss referred to her, the very spirit of Great Britain, the rock upon which modern Britain was built, has passed. And in just one short week, we have had the changing of a prime minister, and now the passing of our longest serving head of state, the rock upon which Britain was built. Alistair Bruce, our royal commentator, joins me now. And Alistair, just on that confirmation now that the King will be King Charles III, and Camilla, Queen Consort.
Yes, it's a moment of continuity and a moment of great sadness. I think for a nation recognizing that the Queen is now dead, it must be a great shock for the new King that instantaneously, while he fathoms the loss of his mother, there will be red boxes to be dealt with. There will be the work that the Queen didn't quite finish yesterday. And he must now continue the function of government as head of state immediately. And that process and continuity of playing the role as monarch is one where everybody now will look to King Charles III for decisions on everything. All the needs and requirements of the days ahead will be placed for him to make decisions on. And it is a very busy changing. And the Queen referred to it herself when her father died back in 1952, that suddenly everybody looked to her. And she didn't necessarily feel prepared for it. And yet, in her 71st year as monarch, she became so comfortably adept. And with that glinting eye, when she was waiting for the arrival of her 15th Prime Minister in the drawing room of Balmoral Castle, she wanted to make the photographer waiting feel at ease and made a charming comment to him. And I think that's always been the nature of how she's done this role, is she's always managed to put herself last and to approach it with great humility. And she's given that torch now to the new King, who must take on so much, and yet at the same time, at this moment, with his brothers and sister and other members of the family, are recognizing the loss of their second parent. And somebody sent a message to me now that, you know, lots of people feel they've lost a parent. And that is the nature of monarchy. It reminds us, because we get to know the monarch almost as though she's a personal friend. And when she goes, it's like losing somebody, and it echoes a loss in one's own family. And I think that those people gathering now outside Buckingham Palace, each of them with their own personal thoughts, they've come for myriad reasons. And a head of state has to encompass myriad people with myriad thoughts. And Elizabeth II did that. And now the new King must take on that responsibility and be the figurehead around which the political process will, of course, dance.
Alistair, thank you very much indeed. Well, obviously we're getting reaction from political leaders, not just here, but throughout the world. I believe that we are about to hear, or shortly to hear, from the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer. We heard not too very long ago from the Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, in Downing Street, who reflected upon the fact that just 2 days ago she was at Balmoral with Her Majesty the Queen, discussing becoming the 15th Prime Minister under Queen Elizabeth's reign. And 2 days later, she was paying tribute to her on behalf of the nation, expressing how devastated she was, and that what a personal inspiration Her Majesty had been to Liz Truss in particular, through her devotion to duty. Well, as I say, we heard that not too very long ago from the Prime Minister, Liz Truss. Let's listen now to the leader of Her Majesty's opposition. It's very strange to say of His Majesty's opposition, Sir Keir Starmer.
Of a remarkable sovereign. It is a deep private loss for the royal family, and our first thoughts are with them at this time. The nation shares in their grief. Queen Elizabeth II created a special, personal relationship with us all, a relationship based on service and devotion to her country. Nobody under the age of 70 has known anything other than Queen Elizabeth II on the throne. For the vast majority of us, the late Queen has been simply the Queen. the only Queen. Above all else, our Queen. As we mourn her loss, we should also treasure her life, our longest serving and greatest ever monarch. Above the clashes of politics, she stood not for what the nation fought over, but what it agreed upon. In crisis, she reassured us, reminding us that we are all part of something that stretches back through time, a symbol of the best of us. I saw it for myself when I led the Crown Prosecution Service. Every time I had the privilege to meet the late Queen, she would ask the most searching questions because she wanted to understand the lives and struggles of her people. And as Britain changed rapidly around her, this dedication became the still point of our turning world, an example that taught us that whatever the challenges we face, the values of service always endures. And the obvious love the late Queen displayed for Britain, the British people gave back in return. That is why there is such an outpouring of grief across the nation today, as there is across the Commonwealth, to which the late Queen was so devoted. Around the world, people are united in mourning and united in celebrating her life. This togetherness is a reminder of what she achieved, a reminder of our shared values, values which I know will be upheld by her beloved son Charles, our new king. So as our great Elizabethan era comes to an end, we will honour the late Queen's memory by keeping alive the values of public service she embodied. For 70 years, Queen Elizabeth II stood as the head of our country, but in spirit, she stood amongst us.
Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, the leader of His Majesty's opposition, reflecting the thoughts of so many millions of people, reflecting on the life of Queen Elizabeth II, whose death was announced a couple of hours ago. Sir Keir there pointing out, as so many of us will and so many of us have, the values of service that the Queen embodied, the values of public service. Sir Keir was particularly emphasising there that she embodied, and talked about how we are united in mourning, and the important point Sir Keir made, united in mourning and celebrating Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II's life. And I think that is the sentiment that is abroad amongst the huge crowd. We're only seeing a small section of it now. The huge crowd that is gathering here at Buckingham Palace. It started just shortly after that sad announcement about the Queen's passing, and the crowd's just continuing to grow in the gloom of this September evening. People walking around quietly, respectfully. They want to be here. They want to be part of this epochal change, this end of an era, the end, as Sir Anthony Selden, the noted historian and author, put it, the end of the second Elizabethan era. And both Elizabethan eras, as we will be reflecting on over the next few days and weeks, quite extraordinary in the change that the nation saw under those two queens. Too long ago for me to fully remember the massive changes that took place under Queen Elizabeth I, but I've lived through a fair few years, and I, like so many millions of fellow citizens, have only known one monarch in my lifetime. And there you can hear, every now and again, breaking out just spontaneous applause. Now there are no senior members of the royal family here. We know that they were in Balmoral. They are in Balmoral this evening, cheering. 3 cheers. Spontaneous 3 cheers for the life of Queen Elizabeth II, and of course inevitably the lights of the camera phones flashing throughout that crowd. Why wouldn't you? Such a moment, September the 8th, 2022, will be remembered forevermore in British history. When Queen Elizabeth II died peacefully, her death was announced a few hours ago. She died peacefully at Balmoral, her beloved Balmoral, this afternoon. But this, though, the symbolic centre of the royal family, not just in the capital of the United Kingdom, but the symbolic centre for the entirety of the world. So many events have taken place here just under the reign of Queen Elizabeth II. And not too very long ago, we've been reflecting on the Platinum Jubilee, something that we all celebrated, the street parties, something of a post-COVID era about it. The Queen participated herself in as many of the events as she could make, but at the age of 96, we all knew that she had to take it easy. And then increasingly over the next few months, we saw less and less of the Queen, but up to the very end, and this is something the Prime Minister reflected on, carrying out devotedly, doggedly, her most important duties, and there can be none more important for the head of state, for the monarch, than overseeing, as she has done with 14, now 15 prime ministers, that transition of power, sometimes between parties, and as we've seen in the last few years, within a party, but nevertheless a smooth transition, passing from Boris Johnson. And remember, just 3 days ago, Her Majesty the Queen was on the throne and Boris Johnson was in number 10 Downing Street. Here we are on Thursday evening. We have King Charles III and Prime Minister Liz Truss. This is truly an extraordinary moment in the history of the United Kingdom. Not least because we know not what we face over the next few months, something that Liz Truss was addressing today on the economic and political side, but we're not thinking about that this evening. Of course we're not. We're thinking about what this means individually, what it means to each and every one of us, what of course it means to a family, a tight-knit family, to so many people, perhaps a slightly odd, a slightly strange, a slightly dysfunctional family in some cases, but there is no other family like the royal family. Of course there isn't. We've chosen to have such a family. They serve us. We look at them, and my goodness me, we mourn with them now. We're looking at them now. We're drinking in this scene with the flag, no, not fluttering anymore, but lying at half-mast above Buckingham Palace, telling us that Her Majesty the Queen, Queen Elizabeth II, has passed. She, of course, passed away, and so many people commenting upon this at her beloved Balmoral Palace. Balmoral in Scotland, of course, where she spent so many summers, indeed all her summers, ever since she was a young girl. It was where her beloved mother and father first took her from the day she was born, and she followed on that tradition with her own family. So many months, so many years spent there. And talking of Scotland, we've got reaction now from the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon. This was her speaking a few moments ago.
Like everyone across Scotland, the United Kingdom, indeed the world, I feel a deep sense of sadness on the death of Her Majesty the Queen. On behalf of the people of Scotland, I offer my sincere and heartfelt condolences to the King, the Queen Consort, and to the entire royal family. There will be many opportunities in the coming days to reflect fully on the Queen's extraordinary life and service. For more than 70 years, Queen Elizabeth has been the great constant in our national life. She has inspired us, on occasion comforted us, and always personified values we hold dear. Throughout her reign, she performed her duties with exceptional wisdom, dedication and fidelity. Scotland loved, respected and admired her. And by all accounts, Her Majesty was rarely happier than when she was here in Scotland at her beloved Balmoral, a fact I have been privileged to observe personally. I hope it will be a source of comfort to her family that she spent her final days in a place that she loved so much. This is a moment of acute loss and profound sadness. It is also a moment of enormous significance. The passing of Queen Elizabeth marks the end of an era. Our nation is in mourning. My heart and my thoughts, and I know those of people across Scotland, are with the royal family at this deeply sad moment.
Well, fulsome tribute there to Queen Elizabeth, whose death has been announced today, from the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon. Words echoed, I'm sure, by the thousands of people who are gathering here this evening in central London, outside Buckingham Palace, to have their own thoughts and to share their own tributes about the Queen's death. Nicola Sturgeon referring there to the Scottish people's love of the Queen and their appreciation of her dedication, her wisdom and her fidelity, and of course referring to the fact that she passed in a place she loved so much. That is, of course, at Balmoral, where my colleague Mark Austin is now. Mark.
Yes, thanks very much, Dermot. And it's interesting that I was just listening in my ear, Dermot, to those cheers that rang out outside Buckingham Palace. 3 cheers, I think you said, and I heard them in my ear. And it was so incredibly moving because we're going to see a lot of formality in the coming days. We're going to see a lot of sadness, a lot of ceremony. But it's going to be little moments like that you witnessed down there outside Buckingham Palace, those cheers. There's going to be little moments like that, I think, that will make people realise how much this Queen meant to them. And in stark contrast to that cheering outside Buckingham Palace, it is just very quiet here. And there were, as I said before, some people here who came along when they heard that the Queen was not well. They came along and wanted to wish her well. And then the announcement came and it just became very, very quiet. The police slowly moved them along because the roads have to be cleared now. They have to close, not least because Prince Harry is on his way from Aberdeen Airport to Balmoral and is expected any time now. It's about an hour and 10 minutes from Aberdeen Airport. He landed about that time ago, so any minute now we could see Prince Harry arrive. He'll be joining his brother. He'll be also joining his father, who's now King Charles, and they will be together this evening in a place where the statement from Buckingham Palace said that the monarch died peacefully this afternoon, and it is very fitting because she was always peaceful here, as I was saying earlier. And it is strange to think that it was just, Thursday, it was Tuesday that she was seeing Liz Truss here and appointing her 15th Prime Minister. I'm just glancing to see if this, I think it is certainly a convoy of some sort arriving here now, and it could well be, I think. Very difficult to tell. It is dark, as you can see, and they were moving at some speed, but certainly Prince Harry is due here any time. And I was saying it's extraordinary to think that it was just Tuesday that the Queen was on her feet. She was smiling. We all saw the photograph. She looked frail, but she was greeting Liz Truss, and she was greeting Boris Johnson before that, and was fulfilling that role that she felt was so important and something that she so wanted to do clearly. And I guess the other thought is that if there was anywhere in the world that she would like to have passed her last days, then Balmoral would be that place. As we wait for Prince Harry, James Matthews is right alongside me here in the rain and the darkness and the sadness of Balmoral. And as we were saying, it is a place that meant so much.
It did, Mark. That was Prince Harry that was part of that three-vehicle convoy, now joining the rest of the family who are in Balmoral. His father, Prince Charles, or now King Charles III, he was here earlier on today, joined, as we saw, by Prince William, Edward and Sophie, and Prince Andrew and Prince Harry, making up the family group that have arrived over the course of the day. And, you know, you speak about the comfort of this place for the family, and that's what it is now, isn't it? I mean, there are no crowds here. It's dark, it's raining, there are media here, but that doesn't mean to say this isn't a community that feels a deep sense of grief out with the gates of Balmoral. I spoke a few minutes ago to the Reverend Kenneth Mackenzie. Now, he is a minister from Crathy Kirk across the road who knew the Queen very well, and he was with her until just before she died. And I'll tell you what he said to me. He spoke about a common sense of loss that we all share. And he said hers was a long life, a life shaped by faith, infused with grace, and characterized by selfless service. I think that's a feeling that is shared in this community, certainly, and much further afield. This is a community in which she was a familiar figure. She had a different background from people who live in Aberdeenshire, but they shared a very strong sense, or they bestowed upon her a very strong sense of belonging. She was seen around the place. She was out and about. In the final few weeks, she was walking on the estate, walking the corgis.
You know, it was interesting. I flew up here this afternoon and I sat next to a guy from just outside Aberdeen. And he said, "I know why you're on your way," and he said the people of Scotland love the Queen because the Queen loved Scotland, and that is true.
Yeah. As articulated the last time she addressed the Scottish Parliament, famously in October 2021, speaking about her affection for the place, an affection shared by herself and her husband, Prince Philip. And, you know, that passion and that love for the place was often interpreted as political enthusiasm for the United Kingdom and Scotland's place in it. It was just at the end of the street where, during the referendum, she was heard to say, "I hope Scottish voters will think very carefully about their future," which was interpreted widely as an endorsement of the Union at a key political time. You know, not confirmed.
Well, it's interesting. We just heard from Nicola Sturgeon, who said she was a much admired, respected, and loved monarch.
Yeah, a monarch who transcended the bitterness and the division of the political playground that we live with in this country, north of the border, in particular when it comes to constitutional politics. A woman admired by all, a role model, a woman who bestowed unity on those around her, and one, of course, that we can grieve as a period of national mourning begins between now and the funeral, a structured period of national mourning.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, James, for the moment, thank you very much. And just to bring you up to date from here in Balmoral, Dermot, Prince Harry has, we're told, just arrived. We saw his vehicles. I think you saw his vehicles just a few moments ago. So Prince Harry has joined his brother and the other members of the family at Balmoral. Back to you, Dermot.
Thanks, Mark. Well, it is 8 o'clock and this is Sky News, where Buckingham Palace has announced that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has died. In a statement earlier this evening, the palace said this. It's a short statement. It said that the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. That was a statement posted on the gates of the Royal Palaces at about 6:30 this evening. Well, Charles, who became king on the death of his mother, had this to say: "The death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family." He continued, "We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realm, and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world." King Charles continued by saying this: "During this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held." And it is that respect and deep affection that we are witnessing right here, right now, outside Buckingham Palace. Thousands of people have gathered here during the course of the last 3 or 4 hours, first initially awaiting any news, a hope for good news. Perhaps we all were preparing ourselves for the worst after the earlier statement about the deterioration in the Queen's health at Balmoral, and the fact that so many members of the royal family were travelling there to be with her, as it turned out, in her final hours. And then since that announcement, it's a simple announcement, as I read out there to you. It's a very short announcement. And the convention is the way that these formal announcements are made from the royal family, whether it be the joyous news of a birth or a marriage, or the saddest news of the passing of a monarch. It is the posting of that statement on the gates of a palace, in this case, the palace, the centre of the palaces, the centre of London, Buckingham Palace, which so many people now are respectfully queuing up to have a look at, to take a picture of, why not, with their mobile phones. And every now and again, spontaneously, people not knowing, I suppose, how to react at this point, just a ripple of respectful applause breaks out. I think there's maybe a small one starting there, just someone in the crowd starts and others pick it up. Just a way of showing their appreciation, their tribute to the life of Her Majesty. And every now and again a cheer goes up, and that then ripples around the crowd. But people just walking around, taking in the scene, but taking in the facts. And we're going to all take a long time to absorb this, as has been said and will be much said over the next few days. The monarch that not many of us did not know, did not think we knew, because she defined our lives, like her or not, for the vast majority of citizens of the United Kingdom. She has always been our monarch. Very few people around now who remember her father, and of course even fewer who remember the days before she was born. It really is the end of an era, the changing of the guard, the changing of the monarch, and that's, of course, under convention, under the Constitution, happened seamlessly and instantaneously. Charles having to deal with both the sadness, the awfulness, expected or not, of the passing of his mother. But it's also now his formal duties, which he has assumed instantly, to take over as king of the realm, as he put it, king of the Commonwealth, King Charles III, the name that we now know he will assume, and that Camilla, his wife, will be the Queen Consort. We also know from the statement that they, of course, are remaining in Balmoral with the members of the family who have gathered there to share those dreadful moments as the Queen passed. They are remaining in Balmoral this evening. Then they will return, as is part of their duty, as is part of the King's duty. They will return to London tomorrow, and a very formal process begins. A process which perhaps I could discuss now with our royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills. And this then, Rhiannon, the formal process of accession.
And I think as the crowds there outside of Buckingham Palace, and no doubt people up and down the country and around the world, come to terms with what I think is going to be an immense sense of shock, especially when it was only on Tuesday that we saw Queen Elizabeth II standing up and appointing her 15th Prime Minister. I think what may come as a surprise to many is that the process, the handover from one sovereign to a next, literally would have happened at the moment that she took her last breath. We have a hereditary monarchy, and now we have a new monarch. We have King Charles III, and what is going to unfold over the coming days will be a sense that the pendulum will swing between mourning her death, but also the country welcoming the new monarch. And part of that will be the Accession Council, where we will see, I think, ritual, pageantry, ancient customs and these ceremonial events that haven't been performed for over 7 decades, as we formally see him proclaimed as king. Now, that will actually happen at St. James's Palace in the coming days, and his succession will also be proclaimed in all 4 parts of the United Kingdom. Now, we know for certain that he is going to take the title of King Charles III, and some people might think, well, of course he would. But actually, a new sovereign is able to choose their name. So we were waiting for that confirmation, because he could have used some of his other names, which are Philip, Arthur, or George. But no, we have King Charles III. He also takes on a number of other roles from Queen Elizabeth II, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, Supreme Governor of the Church of England, Duke of Lancaster, so inheriting the portfolio of land and property set aside to fund the monarch, and also he will now be head of the Commonwealth. And I think Alistair Bruce, our events commentator, was making an interesting point earlier, that now he has to take up all those matters of state that his mother was dealing with, had dealt with on a day-to-day basis. However, what is abundantly clear is you will also have a family who are in the most profound period of mourning. And in many ways, it is lovely to know that they are all at the moment gathered at Balmoral, a place where they have shared so many wonderful times together. It really was a place that they could all come to with the Queen. They could relax away from the prying eyes of the rest of the world. Balmoral has a real sense of remoteness, of seclusion. There's a wildness to it. And we know that they love their time in the countryside. And the statement from King Charles III, I think, in a way summed up how the family are feeling, as he talked about the death of his beloved mother and described it as a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. He went on to say, "We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much loved mother. I know that her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world." But the final paragraph, I think, was very important for him, and important for showing that this is going to be a difficult moment for him, a moment of real mixed emotions. But he said that during this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and